Lakeland PBS, the Bemidji Pioneer, Brainerd Dispatch, Park Rapids Enterprise, and Northern Community Radio are proud to present Debate Night 2022, a look at our area legislative candidates. Your moderator tonight is Ray Gildow. And now, the House District 6A debate.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our third night of debates on 2022 at Lakeland Public TV Studios tonight in Brainerd. I'm Ray Gildow, your moderator, and looking for exciting debates coming up right away. This first round. We're continuing an exciting week of debates covering topics and issues that are important to you and our communities. Tonight we will cover two of the remaining three state debates, and tomorrow night we will have the final debate at 8 o'clock. Our candidates this evening are Ben Davis, who is the Republican, and Rick Blake, who is the Democratic Farmer Labor candidate. Our panelists this evening are Dennis Wyman, who is the news director for Lakeland Public Television, and Heidi Holton, who is a National Public Radio affiliate, KAXE news director, and Chelsea Perkins from the Brainerd Dispatch, who was voted this year as the best writer in the Lakes area. Congratulations, Chelsea. Thank you. You bet. Just to kind of go through the rules, they're pretty simple, and they're the rules that we've been using for a number of years now. Each candidate will have 3 minutes to make an opening comment. The panel will ask questions after the opening comment. Some will be their own, and some will be from the public. Each candidate will get 2 minutes to answer the question, and each candidate will have a 1 minute rebuttal opportunity or an opportunity just to add something to what they had already said. Candidates will have the option of using 1 minute of bonus time anytime during this 50-minute debate. This can be used just one time from an initial question or during the rebuttal. Questions continue until we are about 50 minutes into the debate, where we will then move to closing comments. The closing comments will be 2 minutes for each candidate. So we're going to answer in reverse order, candidate A, then candidate B for comments. Then B goes to the first question, followed by A, and then candidate A and B, etc. This will continue all the way through candidate questions and closing comments. Closing comments are order of dependent on who ended the last question, regardless of how many questions were asked. So the order of questions this evening will start with Chelsea. We'll have the first question, and Dennis then will have the second question, and Heidi will have the third question. And the first opening comments will be coming from Ben Davis. So you have your minutes for the opening comment.
Thank you, Ray.
You bet.
Thank you to Dennis, Heidi, and Chelsea for being a part of this. Thank you, Lakeland Public Television, for putting this on for us for Debate Night 2022. My name is Ben Davis, and I am running for the Minnesota House of Representatives in District 6A as the Republican-endorsed candidate. I have been faithfully married to my lovely wife, Dawn, for over 22 years now, and we pastor at a local church in Brainerd, Minnesota. We live just south of Cross Lake a few minutes, and we've pretty much lived in this area our whole lives. We have 6 beautiful children together, 2 of whom are now adults. In these last 2 years, we've seen government overreach go to an all-new level. Our governor shut down our businesses, schools, and churches not once, but twice. That turned my attention to public policy. We saw our governor aid the profits of big box stores while he deemed small businesses as non-essential, and he forced them to shut down. This caused many of them to never open their doors again. In some instances, small business owners were fined or even jailed simply because they could not afford to close. This should never happen in the great state of Minnesota. We also saw this current Democrat government sit back and do nothing as we all watched portions of Minneapolis burn, including a police department. This happened at the same time Democrats started screaming to defund the police. This should never happen in the great state of Minnesota. I pledge to the residents of District 6A that I will stand for law and order. I will work hard to prosper our local economy. I will work hard with fellow legislators to deliver record-setting tax cuts that will put more money back in the pockets of Minnesotans, because Minnesotans know how to spend their money way better than the government does. I pledge to do whatever I can to help the mining and timber industry in our great state so that Minnesota can prosper for generations to come. We can do this while also being responsible with our natural resources. We are a land that enjoys our beautiful lakes and woods, and our business culture relies heavily upon them as well. With record high inflation and the price of gas at the pump, there has never been a better time to vote Republican than now. We have so much potential for greater prosperity waiting to be unleashed, but this current Democrat House and Governor's office keep holding us back. Thank you, and I am excited to be the next representative of House District 6A. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. Rick.
Hi, I'm Rick Blake, and I'm the DFL endorsed candidate for House District 6A. Thank you, Lakeland PBS, the Bemidji Pioneer, the Brainerd Dispatch, and the Park Rapids Enterprise, and Northern Community Radio. And thank you, Ben, for being here this evening. I was born and raised in northern Minnesota. My wife and I raised our 4 children here. I decided to run for 3 main reasons. First, we cannot continue to get nothing done. The last session was a failure. Our communities were relying on what was in the tax bill, including a $4 billion in tax cuts and additional local government aid dollars that would have helped keep the lid on property taxes, but it went nowhere. Replacing lead water supply lines is critical to the health of our children. Its funding also went nowhere. Second, many legislators who are good at getting things done won't be in the legislature next year. Examples are Republican Senator Kerry Rood, DFL Representative Bob Marcourt, and the late independent David Tomasoni. All legislators who effectively represented their districts but were also very good at working together to get things done. Third, by far mostly on the Republican side, local party conventions have nominated candidates with extremist views. This includes the Republicans in 6A. In summary, we can't continue to get nothing done, we're losing a boatload of effective legislators, and we're nominating extremists who will find it difficult to work effectively with others. We need effective representation in St. Paul that gets things done for us. My life experience has prepared me for this role. Over 30 years' experience working in the paper mining and construction industries, I know how to get things done. I'm a small business owner. I've been on a city council and various associated boards and commissions for over 7 years now. I have a proven track record of getting things done because I know how to listen to different viewpoints and find common ground. I strongly support our public schools. My daughter was a middle school teacher who, like all teachers, believed all students deserve the freedom to learn an honest history of our nation, both the good and the bad, so they can learn from our mistakes and create a better future for all of us. Minnesotans also need freedom to access high-quality, affordable health care, including mental health care. As a volunteer, I've helped seniors negotiate their way through the maze of choices when it comes to Medicare options. As parents, my wife and I cared for our young son, and later our adult daughter as they fought hard battles with cancer. I know how hard we sometimes had to fight with insurance companies to provide the medicines and treatments our children needed. I understand on a very personal level the need for good quality, accessible, affordable health care, and I will fight to protect our freedom to manage our own health care, including the freedom to manage your own reproductive health. I am also familiar with the issues that are important in Minnesota's towns and cities because I'm an active member of the Coalition of Greater Minnesota Cities, an organization that fights for the interests of Greater Minnesota. Please support me in my effort to represent you in the state legislature.
Thank you, Rick. Our first question this evening will come from Chelsea.
What issue do you believe matters most to rural Minnesotans, and what would you do as a legislator to address that issue?
Questions for me first?
Okay, well, I think Minnesotans are concerned about inflation. I think they need to be able to support themselves and their families. They're struggling because of inflation. Lots of causes are beyond our control. It's a global issue due to things beyond our control like the war in Ukraine, agriculture, oil, and natural gas prices. Coming out of COVID, large corporations are making record profits like oil companies. But there are some things we can do to help, and not by adopting the Republican zombie policy of reducing taxes on the wealthy. We could lower taxes on low and moderate incomes, and part of that was in the bill that didn't pass, that the Republicans walked away from. We could raise, we could reduce pressure to raise property taxes on the local level by increasing local government aid. There was a proposal to revise the formula and put $34 million additional in that. I would even favor the $90 million that was in the DFL bill. And we could also institute a child tax credit. We could increase street aid for cities under 5,000. Right now they don't get anything. So all of those things would decrease. In fact, education too. Fully funding education would reduce the pressure to raise property taxes by school districts. 70% of school districts are have local referendums for operating. So those are some of the things that we can do in the legislature to help. Republicans walked away from $4 billion in tax cuts at the end of the session. Many of them were permanent, and this was after we had gotten a $2.7 billion cut earlier in the session. So those are the things I think the legislature could do.
Thank you, Rick. Ben.
Thank you. What is important to our district here? St. Paul needs to understand that our business community here relies heavily on the hospitality industry. What can help the hospitality industry in the Brainerd Lakes area and in the Grand Rapids area and everywhere in between would be lowering taxes. And to my opponent, it might be, some zombie comment. I can't remember exactly the term he used, but it doesn't make it not true. Minnesotans are hurting right now with inflation being at a 40-year high. And it's not Ukraine's fault or it's not Putin's fault. It's this current Democrat-ran administration's fault that we have such high taxes right now in the state of Minnesota. So Republicans are going to deliver record-setting tax cuts for the constituents of this land, and I'm looking forward to working with legislators to do exactly that. The price of energy is out of control right now. The price of property is out of control right now. Taxes are just high across the board, along with groceries and gas prices. And I think if we put money back into the taxpayer's pocket, they're going to put that into our economy. And that's going to be important for this area. Because we are a hospitality-driven community. Minnesotans will get us out of this mess if we just let them spend their own money.
Thank you, Ben. Rick, you got any additional comments?
No, just that I think, well, yeah. I know that we're suffering, and I know that we need to cut taxes in order to put more money in people's taxes, and it just disappoints me that the last legislative session walked away from $4 billion in tax cuts, and that wouldn't happen I wouldn't favor that. I would certainly do my best to make that happen next time.
Yeah, I love how the Democrats blame the Republicans for that problem right there. We could just as easily blame the Democrats for not working together with Republicans. So the infighting needs to stop. But again, record high inflation in 40 years. It's out of control. We have so much potential for prosperity in our district right here, especially with mining as well and the timber industry. And I'd like to do what I can to help those industries out as much as possible as well.
Thank you. The next question will be directed to you, Ben, and it will be coming from Dennis.
Would you, as a legislator, be willing to consider allowing parents of students to direct the portion of state funds for their children to private K through 12 schools? In other words, vouchers.
I do support vouchers. Right now, we have things being taught in our public schools that have parents all across this district a little scared, and that's why you'll see across the state of Minnesota and across the United States of America right now, parents showing up to school board meetings like never before. They're concerned about surveys that their children are being given by the state that have some questionable sexual questions coming at these kids. I've read some of these surveys, as well as critical race theory, CRT, and they've been framing it with different terms lately, intersectionality and equity, they've been calling it, and some other things, but they're pushing for CRTs in schools, and that's got parents concerned, and we've seen parents withdrawing their children from the schools and homeschooling them, putting them in private schools, going to online teaching, more than we've seen in recent history. And another problem is we're starting, 40% of our budget here in Minnesota is spent on education. And we keep throwing money at the education system, but yet the students' testing scores keep going down, and that's been happening for like the last 30 years in the state of Minnesota. And so yeah, I do approve of vouchers. I think the money should follow the parents' decision for their children. We need to empower parents to make those choices for their children.
Thank you, Ben. Rick?
I don't support vouchers. Like I said at the beginning, I strongly support public education. My daughter was a teacher. I know lots of teachers. I know school administrators. I know superintendents. I know school board members. And CRT is not taught in any school in Minnesota. It's a fear tactic I'm just surprised to hear it here. But I strongly support public schools. I think the money needs to go to public schools. The state, for example, hasn't fully funded education for quite a while. I know that test scores have dropped, and that's been happening. I think partly because we're not fully funding public schools. 70% of schools have operating referendums. I just would like to see the state follow through on their commitments, for example, for special ed. And also, one of the things that happens in public education is the state doesn't consider inflation. And it seems to me that only makes common sense to say, next year if inflation is or the cost of living, for example, goes up 4%, well, funding has to go up 4%. That alone would have made a big difference for school districts all across Minnesota. And I think I just think public education is very important. It's gotten lots of people out of poverty over the years, and it's one of the best things about America is the public education system.
Ben, got another minute.
We can always improve our public education system. And again, throwing more money at it year after year doesn't seem to be solving the problem. And I'm not against throwing money at the public education, but I do believe that we need to look at doing some things different when it comes to that. And of course, a Democrat talking point these days is critical race theory isn't being taught in schools. Folks, it's not true. I went to a school board meeting where we were bringing up these concerns, and one of the school board members stood up and was frustrated with how parents saying that they're pushing for critical race theory in their schools, and he was so confident in saying, we're not doing that here in our public schools. And then the next thing they did on the agenda was go into an equity plan, and listening to this equity plan, it was all based in critical race theory. So don't let them deceive you, folks. This is the direction that the left wants to take our public education system.
Rick, any additional comment there?
I can't answer that. I just know that critical race theory is not something that's being taught in our schools, and I think it's a fear tactic that's being used to scare parents. And it disappoints me, because earlier you said you wanted to end the divisiveness, but it doesn't seem like that's happening.
Thank you. The next question will be coming from Heidi, and Rick, you will have the first response, please.
It was mentioned in the opening that the governor had shut down businesses in the region. It wasn't mentioned that it was a global pandemic was the reason they were shut down. And that Minnesota wasn't the only state in America that was shut down during that time. Hindsight is 2020. Over 13,000 people died from COVID in the state of Minnesota. If you had been in the legislature at that time, or if you had been Governor Walz at that time, what would you have done differently?
Well, I support Governor Walz. I supported the decisions he made at the time. I think they were based on science. I think we did a good job. I think also that we lost a lot of people, and I had friends who didn't get vaccinated and didn't wear masks, and they died, and they suffered. So at the time, I just think that we did a good job in fighting the pandemic. After all, it was a once-in-a-century pandemic. Lots of people died in the last pandemic in the early part of the century. I'd rather not, and of course there was the plague, which was caused by fleas on rats, and nobody knew that at the time. At least we knew what was going on, and we could wear masks, we could take steps. We had lots of economic development for businesses in Grand Rapids. We did very well there, I think. I don't think we lost very many businesses, but we stepped up and provided economic assistance for those businesses. So I did support Governor Walz. I still support Governor Walz, and I just think he did a good job. I think Minnesota did a good job. We're one of the states that had fewer deaths per population, so I appreciate that.
Thank you. Ben?
You know, I remember this statement right here from Governor Walz. I believe it was 15 days to slow the spread. So the premise of your question, you had mentioned that hindsight was 20/20. Well, he did it twice. He didn't shut down everything once. He did it twice. And already from the first shutdown, people were already losing their businesses. Why did the big box stores get to stay open? Why were they deemed as essential, but you, the small business owner, were forced to shut down? I know many small business owners who are very upset the way that Governor Walz handled the pandemic. You know, and at first, you know, I can't blame Governor Walz at the beginning for shutting everything down because we didn't know exactly what COVID was going to do. But as over the next few months, as we saw, yes, people were dying, but they weren't dying like the news media and experts were saying that they were going to die. There was no reason to close down everything a second time. And I think Lisa Hansen, a business owner down south, would have done things differently. She had to sit 60 days in jail because she couldn't afford to open up her business or shut down her business on the second shutdown. She couldn't afford to do it. Her livelihood was at stake. They threw her in jail for not shutting down her little coffee shop. I also know local businesses right here in our area have been fined over $100,000 because they didn't follow all the rules that Governor Walz had put down for them to follow. This should not happen in Minnesota, and I would like to see that it never happens again.
Thank you, Ben. Rick, any additional comments?
No, I'll just say again that I supported the steps that we took. It was a pandemic, a once-in-a-century pandemic, and that's it.
Any additional comments, Ben?
Yeah, I'll just clarify. I do not support the way Governor Walz shut down our economy, not once, but twice. That was wrong.
Thank you. Our next question is coming from Chelsea, and Ben, you will have the first shot at it.
Yes or no, do you believe the 2020 election was stolen from Donald Trump? What changes, if any, should be made to ensure the integrity of future elections?
I am so grateful for this question because I've been fighting for election integrity in my own backyard and for transparency in elections. I would like us to have audits in elections because we audit all kinds of things in government and in businesses, especially when it comes to finances. Why aren't we auditing the most important thing, the most sacred right we have in this nation is the right to vote? The blood of patriots, both men and women, shed their blood so that we could have this sacred right to vote. And I just, again, this is another talking point of the left. They keep looking to conservatives and Republicans and independents who are questioning the 2020 election when Democrats questioned the 2016 election for 4 years. Hillary Clinton went on a tour all around America screaming about how the election was stolen from her and how President Trump was an illegitimate president, and no one was screaming at her, oh, you election denier, oh, you're a conspiracy theorist. No, the mainstream media carried water for Hillary Clinton. Our own Senator Amy Klobuchar, I believe it was in 2018 on an HBO documentary, I have an audio recording of this, she stood up and was advocating against these voting machines. She was concerned about their legitimacy. She was concerned that they're basically owned and made by 3 different companies. And she went on to talk about how they're very susceptible to fraud. So I am all for election integrity. I would like to see us get voter ID done here in Minnesota. I would like us to get away from these massive mail-in ballots, and I'm not against absentee ballots. And I would like us to clean out our voter rolls because free and fair elections is very, very important.
Thank you, Ben. Rick?
Well, I've been an election judge for years. Our system works, and it works well. We Minnesotans know how to run a fair election. We lead the nation in voter participation. We have procedures in place to protect election integrity. In the rare instance where impropriety or improper voting is done, it's met with strong systems to ensure it doesn't happen again. Counties double check the results. The election judges, first of all, what happens is, I've been to the courthouse, we check the machine before the election, make sure it's working properly. Then in the precincts, every single ballot's initialed by 2 election judges. They're all counted. They go through the machine. We have paper ballots to back up everything. We count them at the end of the day to make sure everything is accurate. And then we have 2, one from the Republican Party, one for the Democratic Party. 2 people accompany the box to the courthouse where it's kept in a locked room. And I've been involved in recounts. I know how the system works, and it works well. In counties, each county has to randomly audit, as Ben asked, 2 precincts. If there's more than 0.25% difference, then more precincts are audited. And if there's more, then all the precincts are audited. In Minnesota, that hasn't happened since 2006, that any additional precincts have had to be counted. And in Crow Wing, it's never happened. Crow Wing has a sterling reputation. They have a wonderful election administrator. They're very good at what they do. Her name is Debbie Erickson. She's great. So if I lose this election, I know I received fewer votes. That's where I stand.
Thank you, Rick. Ben, any additional comments?
Yeah, I do. No, they don't audit the votes. They do a recount. When I mention audit, I'm talking about something a little deeper and a little more in depth when it comes to voting. But here's the facts. Gallup did a poll in 2020, and they polled, do people trust the honesty of our elections? Gallup found in their poll, 60% of Americans do not trust in the honesty of our elections. So we have a huge responsibility as legislators here in Minnesota to restore people's confidence in our elections. And yes, I will accept the results of the upcoming election here in November. Thank you.
Thank you. Rick, any additional comments?
Just one point. Yes, I'll accept the election too. I said that. But when you talked about, they do recount the precincts, and I would call that an audit. So
that's it. Yeah. Thanks. The next question is coming from Dennis, and it will be addressed to you first, Rick.
One of you will be elected and will be serving your first time in the state legislature. Are there any legislators that you respect and who you try to model your work at the Capitol after?
Well, I did mention Senator Kerry Rood. I mentioned Marquardt. I like Senator Senjum. He's a Republican from Rochester as well, because I know they sit down and I know they can work together. Representative Solberg was another person who did really well working across the aisle. He worked with other legislators. He had a lot to do with budgets. I've had lots of experience going down and talking to legislators, and the one that I'd want to model myself after are the people that are able to listen and work together. And there's lots of legislators like that, but this year it seems like lots of them are leaving or are retiring. Tom Bach was another one. So lots of those effective legislators that were able to sit down with people, discuss issues, and make compromise are leaving. And that's the kind of legislator that I would like to, that's the kind I'd like to be. I'd like to be one of those people who sits down, solves problems, and gets things done for Minnesotans.
Thank you, Rick. Ben.
Yes, thank you. I have an immense amount of respect for Senator Justin Eichhorn. who's running for senator in District 6. And he's a man of integrity. He is a family man. He's been helping me out a lot, showing me the ropes. The first time that we went out door knocking together, you know, Justin does not look like much of an athlete, but the first time we went out door knocking, he turned into this athlete running door to door, and I could hardly keep up with him. And so he taught me how to door knock efficiently. I'm very grateful for him. I'm also very grateful for Representative Steve Green, just the composure and the calmness that he brings to the legislature. And he speaks the truth in love. He's just very honest. You know you're going to get a straight answer for him, and that's what I'd like to model my legislating if I'm elected after Steve Green. And Representative Steve Green's actually running for Senate now, and Representative Josh Heinzman has been a huge help to me. Wonderful family man, has been doing great down in the legislature for this community, and he's been a great help to me as well. So I would say those are probably my top 3 picks. I've gotten to know Representative Matt Bliss, have become friends with him, really enjoy his company. And I'm sure I'll get to know many more good senators and representatives if you should elect me down there.
Rick, any additional comments there? No? Any additional time needed there, Ben? No. Okay. We'll go to the next question, and it will be asked by Heidi, and Ben, you will get the first shot at it.
There was a 22% increase in overdose deaths last year in Minnesota. Most of those were associated with fentanyl. What role can the Minnesota legislature take to lower the numbers and support law enforcement and recovery professionals?
Well, fentanyl definitely is a problem. The fentanyl trafficking coming over our southern border has made every state in this country a border state. Unfortunately, in Minnesota, there's not much we can do about shutting down the border. I worked at Minnesota Dalton Teen Challenge for 12 years, and so I know the effects that drug addiction can have on folks, and this fentanyl is killing people. It is a weapon of mass destruction. And we need to get behind our law enforcement and provide for our law enforcement anything and everything they need for training and equipment. I was actually speaking with a director of a local treatment program, and he told me that one of their residents was busted with fentanyl. They opened the trunk, and in this case is where this gentleman was storing the fentanyl. And when the police officers opened the case, they had an overdose just from smelling the fentanyl, and now they're making fentanyl to look like little candies. We need to do something about this as soon as possible. So I'd be willing to get behind law enforcement and provide them with whatever training and equipment they need to help us with the lack of law and order we've seen these last few years in our state.
Thank you. Rick?
Yes, from when I've talked to policemen, police officers, and the sheriff's department too, most of the issues that the police are facing now are because we don't have enough beds in mental health facilities to treat people. And I think that Minnesota used to be a leader in treating chemical dependency, but now the rule of 25 and a shortage of beds just makes that very difficult. So I think the legislature needs to increase funding for mental health facilities. We need more beds to treat people with mental health issues. One of the things that I was told was that one individual might be brought to the emergency room several times in one day simply because the doctor releases them and there's no place to put them. So he'll have to bring them back to the ER. And sometimes a doctor can put somebody on a 76-hour hold, but if there's no bed available, that person is just released back. So I think it's a mental health crisis. I know fentanyl is a very dangerous drug. There's other ones too, including alcohol. I think we need to have a better treatment facilities, more treatment facilities, and it needs to be more accessible so that we don't just leave people in an ER and then have them released again. And I also think we need more police. I know that for example, in the United States, we have fewer police, we have more serious crime, more people incarcerated. One of the things policeman suggested too was that we have more police and actually cameras in public places would be a deterrent. So I think in the long run, I think if we hired more police, initially it would be costly, but in the long run it would be cheaper because it's way more expensive to pay for people to be in prison than to have them be in treatment.
Any additional comments, Ben?
Yeah, I would just like to add that, yeah, I mean, if mental health and drug addiction can go hand in hand, and that's why we need to promote more dual diagnosis facilities and support more dual diagnosis facilities like Minnesota Adult and Teen Challenge, and there are others out there as well that we can get behind and help. Hiring more my opponent brought up hiring more law enforcement. That would be great, but the problem with that is right now people are so discouraged at going into law enforcement because of the Democrats screaming at them, it's time to defund the police. We had one Representative Ilhan Omar actually saying that we should dismantle the Minneapolis Police Department, and so the morale of police is at an all-time low, and we need to we need to elect legislators who are going to absolutely get behind our law enforcement. I'm actually endorsed by the Minnesota Police and Peace Officers Association. I'm the candidate who's endorsed by them because they know I'll have their backs.
Thank you. Rick, any additional comment?
I'm a Democrat and I'm not screaming at the police.
Okay, our next question is coming from Chelsea and be directed to Rick first.
What is your position on abortion, and what changes, if any, would you pursue at the state level based on your position?
Well, I believe in Minnesota we have a constitutional right to manage our own reproductive health, and I would protect that right. So I would resist any efforts to have a constitutional amendment or to change that in Minnesota. I think it's very important that we have that. We're one of the few states that do. And I think women's rights are under attack, and I want to preserve that right in Minnesota. I think we all need the right access to affordable health care, and I think we need, those kinds of decisions need to be made between a doctor and her patient and her family, and those are very difficult decisions. I understand that, but I don't think the government has a place in that waiting room. So I support a woman's right to choose, and I support our constitutional right to manage our own reproductive health.
Thank you, Ben.
I am unapologetically pro-life. I believe that life begins at conception and ends in natural death, and that's why I'm endorsed by the Minnesota Concerned Citizens for Life. I do believe that government absolutely does have a responsibility in protecting women's choices, but what about the choices for the child in the womb? I just watched a video yesterday of a child in the womb at 6 weeks old, and it had a heartbeat, it had fingers forming, and it had beautiful eyes and a nose, hands and feet that were forming, and it appeared to be actually looking at its hands and feet, and that actually might have been later on in the video as it progressed the age of the child in the womb. But that is a child in the womb, and I would pose the question, who's fighting for their rights? President Reagan made a comment, something like, I can't help that everybody who's for abortion seems to be here. They seem to be living. They had the right to life. And these children in the womb absolutely have the same right that every single one of us here has. You know, right now a Democrat talking point is that that's an extreme view, believing in life begins at conception and ends in natural death, that is an extreme view. Well, John F. Kennedy, one of our greatest presidents, he believed that. One of my childhood heroes, President Ronald Reagan, he believed in life from conception to natural death. And another one of my heroes, Martin Luther King Jr., believed in that as well. So I am absolutely the pro-life candidate in this election.
Thank you, Ben. Any additional comments, Rick?
I just know that it's also a religious issue. Different religions have different ideas of when life begins, and so that's another reason to not have the government dictate that. So, for example, some religions believe that life begins when the baby takes a first breath. I don't believe that, and I know it's a difficult issue. But I do think it's something that needs to be decided with the family and between the woman and her doctor.
Ben, any additional comments?
Yeah, this is not a theological debate, and I believe that life begins in the womb because I've seen the scientific evidence of it. The child has a heartbeat as early as 5.5 weeks. So I think we need to quit playing God. I'll tell you this, 70% of Minnesotans also agree with me that we need at least some form of restrictions on abortion in Minnesota, because right now in Minnesota, there are no restrictions on when a woman can have an abortion. One other thing I'll say is I'd like us to get behind facilities like Lakes Area Pregnancy Support Center and New Beginnings Pregnancy Support Center in Grand Rapids. What they do is they come alongside of women who are struggling with this decision, and they encourage them and let them know that there's help there.
Thank you. Our next question is coming from Dennis, and it will be directed to Ben first.
The 2023 legislature will convene with what appears to be a significant surplus at this point. How should the money be used in respect to spending and/or tax relief?
This one's really easy for me. Give it back to the people who paid it in. If Rick comes to me and buys a certain, let's say I have a store and he buys a certain product for me, and later he finds out that I overcharged him, and he comes back to me, I have an obligation to make sure I give that money back to him. It's the right thing to do. Why don't we have the same standard on our government? So the over $9 billion projected surplus, I think we need to give it back to the taxpayer. And again, I am completely for lowering our income taxes. We are, I believe, top 5 in the nation when it comes to income tax rate, and that's across the board. That's not just for high income families, that's for all income families. And right now, actually, I take that back. I don't believe low income families are paying that much in income tax, and I don't think they should. But definitely the middle class is getting hit hard right now when it comes to taxes.
Rick?
Yes, can you repeat the question, please?
Who's question?
Sure. The question is, you're going to be facing a significant, it appears that way, a significant budget surplus if elected and you're serving your district. How should that money be used in regards to tax breaks, spending? How would you put that money to use?
Well, I know it's a large surplus, and I know at the last session that there was a $4 billion tax cut left on the table that was agreed upon, and they ran out of time. I know the legislative session failed in that regard. I'd like to see that happen, but I'd also like to see schools fully funded. I'd like to see transportation infrastructure. I'd like to see the state come up with a way to fund the repair of our roads and bridges, because we just keep falling behind. And so those two things are important. I do think that low and moderate incomes can receive a tax cut. That's another thing. But I also think that there's other ways that the state could use the surplus that would result in a tax cut for families. And that is, first of all, by increasing local government aid, because that goes to local cities and towns across Minnesota. They use that money for police and fire protection. That means they don't have to raise property taxes. If we fully funded education, it would reduce school districts' need to increase their levy. So property taxes are a real regressive way to tax people, and I think the state can help by reducing property taxes, and I think that would help too. So reducing or fully funding education, funding roads and bridges, increasing local government aid, those things would all help Minnesota. And you know, I realize that we pay taxes. Minnesota is one of the best quality states to live in the country, and that's been that way. We do tax, and people pay tax, and they like to live here because of the quality of life that they have. And I think part of that's due to the way Minnesota uses its taxes.
Thank you, Rick. Any additional comment there, Ben?
Yeah, I'll just address the question one more time. What would you do with over $9 billion tax surplus? That money belongs to you, Minnesotans. It should be given back to you. You paid in too much, and you know how to spend your money better than the government does.
Thank you. Any additional comments? Rick?
No.
No? Okay. We'll move on to the next question. Will be coming from Heidi, and it will be directed to you, Rick.
Let's move our conversation back to businesses within this district of 6A. Employers face a lot of barriers to bringing in new employees. That includes housing and daycare. What solutions would you support to help the region grow?
The worker shortage? Is that? Yeah.
Worker shortage in housing and daycare.
Okay. Well, I think that one of the things that we've got to do is make, to have workers stay in Minnesota, we need to make our communities welcoming. We need to make them good places to live. And then you mentioned childcare. There's programs that we need to do to subsidize childcare. Workforce housing, I know that's expensive, so there's things that we can do to lower the price of housing. We need access to health care. I think that those things would help. I do think that we can, even broadband is important. So we need good infrastructure, we need good schools. All those things would attract workers. And I think that's the kind of thing. We need schools that provide workers with training that businesses need. Main Street grants to help these businesses rehabilitate their buildings. We've done that in Grand Rapids and very successfully. And also the storefronts making the community attractive. I think small businesses can thrive when we make the communities a good place to live.
Thank you, Rick. Ben?
Yeah, as you've probably been able to tell, I am an advocate for small government. I'm a small government guy. And to me, it just it seems like the more that government gets involved, the worse things get. I think we need, like when it comes to the housing problem, we need to get government out of the way. Permitting and regulations is killing the housing market. I've even heard statistics as far up as 25% of the building cost could be just in permits alone. Now that sounds extreme, and that is extreme. And so I think we need to lower the permitting costs for housing. I also think that we need to cut back regulations, and of course we need some regulations. We don't want people wiring their own home not up to code and burning down their home. So we do need to have regulations, but I think it's gotten way out of hand, and I think most home builders would agree with me. We also need to look at things like there's just rules like lot sizes, exterior metal standards on buildings, garage and storage requirements. I just think we can back off of all these regulations so that we can help decrease the price of homes. Also, you brought up daycare centers. And we don't see as many just small little local daycare centers around as much anymore. And that's again because of government regulation. And again, we need to have regulations on daycare centers. We need to keep kids safe. But again, I just think it's gotten out of hand with all the regulations.
Thank you, Ben. Rick?
Yes, I too heard that 25% figure for permitting fees. So I actually checked it out, and I had somebody run some numbers for me, and I found out that permit costs for projects in this particular study that ranged from projects from $220,000 to $10 million, the fees ranged from 0.6% to 1.8%, which is a far cry from 25%. And then the other thing I'd like to say is there are housing rules in Minnesota, like Ben mentioned, you don't want people wiring their own homes, but also like arc fault breakers and things like that, they have become more expensive. Inflation has caused that. And Minnesota is cold in the winter, so it's important that houses be built with energy conservation in mind. So, and as far as daycare, the regulation, I just met somebody this morning whose child was at a small daycare, fell off of a changing table, had a blood clots in the hospital now. So there are necessary regulations. You have to be very careful about removing some of those because they're there for a reason.
Ben, any?
Yeah, and again, I'll just talk about cutting back the regulations. so that small daycare centers can open up and be closer to people's workplace and people's home. And right now we're getting more and more very large daycare centers, and they're having a hard time finding workers, and so they don't have enough workers watching these children in these huge daycare centers. And I'm sure there are daycare centers that are doing a great job. He just brought up the low cost of permits. Well, I'm very excited for you home builders and for people that just recently built a home. You know how expensive permitting can be. So thank you.
That concludes our questioning, gentlemen. So we'll now move to the closing comments. You each have 3 minutes. And Ben, we will start with you.
Inflation is causing a significant amount of stress on folks these days. With the record high price of gas, groceries, and taxes, it's time for major tax cuts on individuals and on businesses. That is why I'm the only candidate in this race who is endorsed by both the Minnesota Chamber of Commerce and the National Federation of Independent Business. I'm also endorsed by the Local 49, the Carpenters Union, the Pipe Trades Union, the Minnesota Farm Bureau, because they know that I am the candidate in this race that has their back. Our local business culture relies heavily on the hospitality industry, which means it relies heavily on people spending money in the district. If we put the money back in the pockets of taxpayers, they will be the ones to boost our economy and relieve the burden that we are all feeling right now. We, the people, are the governing authority in Minnesota, and we support our local law enforcement. That is why I am the candidate in this race who is endorsed by the Minnesota Police and Peace Officers Association. This current Democrat government has forgotten law and order and forgotten that we are a constitutional republic with God-given rights. These are not radical beliefs. They're the beliefs of most of the people that I've been the almost 3,500 doors I've knocked on. They believe this as well. And these beliefs are at the foundation of our Minnesota state constitution. It's time to elect common sense public servants who understand our rights and our freedoms. I am that candidate. Government shall never infringe upon your right to bear arms. That's why I'm the only candidate in this race that's endorsed by the NRA and the Minnesota gun owners. I will work hard to initiate public policy that promotes prosperity in our district and secures the blessings of liberty for generations to come. Please vote Ben Davis. Thank you, and may God bless the great state of Minnesota.
Thank you, Ben. Rick.
Again, thank you, Lakeland PBS, the Bemidji Pioneer, the Brainerd Dispatch, Park Rapids Enterprise, and Northern Community Radio. And thanks again, Ben, for showing up. In this election for House District 6A representative, the choice is clear. I ask you to choose me, a representative committed to effectively representing your interests in the legislature. I have a long track record of service to others and have demonstrated the ability to work with people from all parties and will get things done for my constituents. I will fight to preserve all our freedoms, including one very important one that we need to be sure and preserve here in Minnesota, and that is the freedom to manage your own reproductive health. I will work to fulfill the state of Minnesota's obligations to our local school districts by fully funding education. All Minnesota students deserve equal access to quality education, no matter what their zip code. Parents deserve the freedom to send their kids to safe and welcoming public schools that prepare their children to become successful, contributing adults. As City Councilor and board member of the Coalition of Greater Minnesota Cities, I have actively and successfully lobbied for the interests of Minnesota's towns and cities with Republicans, Democrats, and independent members of the legislature. I have served on committees with other rural leaders of all parties that work together to develop transportation policies, local government aid and property tax relief policies, and economic development policies that were carefully crafted to help Minnesota's rural communities thrive. I would then join other city leaders during the legislative session to visit our legislators and make sure they understood our needs. I think we need people like me who know how to work well with others in the legislature. Please vote for me, Rick Blake, on November 8th. And ask your friends and neighbors to pick Rick, too.
Thank you, gentlemen. On behalf of the board and the staff at Lakeland Public Television, We thank you both for taking time out of your busy schedule to share your viewpoints. Much appreciated. If you missed any portion of tonight's debate or would like to watch it again, you can give us about 24 hours and it'll be posted on the Lakeland Public Television website. That's lptv.org. Also, the Brainerd Dispatch provides additional candidate coverage in general at their special election website, brainerddispatch.com/vote. And you can also find election coverage from KAXE on their website at kaxe.org. Now, please don't leave your room or your dial because we've got coming up at 8 o'clock House District 5B debate with Greg Hendrickson and Mike Weiner. Thank you.
Lakeland News is member-supported content. Please consider supporting Lakeland News today.